Danilla Peters had barely set her purse on her desk when her manager looked up from behind the glass wall of his office. "Danilla, my office now." "No, I'm sorry for your loss. No, how are you holding up?" "Just a command." She followed him in, still wearing the black blazer she'd bought for her mother's funeral because she hadn't had the strength to change before coming to work. An HR representative was already seated beside Greg Lawson, avoiding eye contact. Greg slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. "We've decided to terminate your employment effective immediately." Danilla frowned, thinking there had to be some mistake. "Terminate? For what?" He folded his hands together. "We need employees who put the company first." She stared at the letter, the words blurred for a moment before she looked back at him. "You approved my leave." "I approved a request," Greg replied flatly, "but your absence demonstrated that you're not dependable when the department needs you." "My mother died." His expression didn't change. "The company has to make difficult decisions." Danilla looked toward HR, waiting for someone to say this couldn't possibly be right. No one spoke. She slowly folded the letter, placed it in her bag and stood up. "I understand." Greg gave a short nod, already reaching for another file as though the conversation had ended. Danilla walked out of the office, packed her desk in complete silence and left without arguing. 6 days later her phone rang. The caller ID made her stop breathing for a second. Division director. The previous week had felt unreal from beginning to end. Only 11 days earlier, Danilla had been sitting beside her mother's hospital bed while answering work emails between conversations with doctors. When it became clear the end was near, she'd submitted a formal request for 4 days of bereavement leave through the company's system, then walked directly into Greg's office to make sure nothing would fall through the cracks. "I'll finish everything critical before I leave," she'd told him. Greg had actually sounded sympathetic. "Take care of your family, Danilla, we'll manage." He approved the request that same afternoon. Believing everything was in order, Danilla spent her final days with her mother instead of worrying about work. After the funeral, she returned determined to rebuild some sense of normal life. Instead, she'd been told that attending her own mother's funeral proved she wasn't committed enough to the company. The memory replayed every night. Not because she'd lost the job. Because Greg had looked directly at her and acted as if the approval had never mattered. During the days that followed, Danilla updated her resume, answered condolence messages from relatives she barely had the energy to respond to, and tried to convince herself there was no point dwelling on what had happened. Then her phone vibrated again. The division director's name was still on the screen. She answered cautiously. "Hello." A calm but strained voice came through the speaker. "Danilla, before you say anything else, I need to ask you one question." Her grip tightened around the phone. "What exactly happened before you left for your mother's funeral?" The question caught Danilla off guard. She had expected an apology, or maybe a routine exit interview that had somehow been delayed. Instead, the division director sounded like someone trying to solve a puzzle. "I'll tell you everything," she said quietly. "I'm listening." Danilla took a slow breath. 3 weeks before my mother passed away, her doctors told us she didn't have much time left. I knew I might need to leave work on short notice, so I didn't wait until the last minute. She explained how she'd submitted the bereavement leave request through the company's system as soon as her mother's condition worsened. After filing it electronically, she'd walked into Greg Lawson's office to make sure there wouldn't be any confusion. "I remember apologizing," Danilla said. "I told him I hated leaving the team during a busy period." "What did he say?" "He looked at me and said, 'Family comes first, we'll cover things here.' Then he approved the request." There was a brief silence on the line. The director finally asked, "You're certain?" "I wouldn't have left otherwise." As they talked, memories flooded back. Even while spending long nights at the hospital, Danilla had been working from her laptop whenever she could. Before leaving, she'd finished every report due that week, prepared detailed handoff notes, assigned pending tasks to co-workers, and emailed everyone involved so no deadlines would be missed. "I even stayed late the evening before I left," she recalled. I wanted the transition to be seamless. You created written handoff instructions. Yes. And the leave approval. I saved the email. The director's tone shifted. You still have it. I save everything work-related. I never thought I'd actually need it. For the first time since the call began, Danilla heard something unexpected, not sympathy but concern. Danilla, he said carefully, would you forward me every document you have, the approval email, your calendar invitation, your handoff notes, every message connected to your leave? She frowned. I can, but why? Another pause. I can't answer that yet. After hanging up, Danilla opened her inbox and searched for the approval. Within seconds, Greg's email appeared exactly where she'd left it. Approved. She attached it along with every related message and pressed send ***. As the files disappeared from her outbox, one question refused to leave her mind. If the approval had always existed, who had made it disappear from the company's records? By 9 o'clock the next morning, the division director had called an emergency meeting with HR, Greg Lawson, and several senior members of the operations department. The atmosphere in the conference room was noticeably tense. Greg walked in with his usual confidence, carrying a folder under one arm. I assume this is about replacing Danilla, he said as he took his seat. The director looked up from the documents spread across the table. No, it's about why she was terminated. Greg didn't hesitate. She abandoned a critical project during one of our busiest weeks without proper authorization. I made the decision the department needed. An HR manager opened Danilla's personnel file on the screen. Our records don't show an approved bereavement leave, she said. According to the system, there was no final authorization. Greg nodded immediately. Exactly, she submitted a request, but I warned her that leaving at that time would put the department at risk. Around the table, several employees exchanged uneasy glances but remained silent. The director slowly slid a printed email across the table. This came directly from Danilla. Greg barely glanced at it. Anyone can forward an email. Before the conversation could move on, a voice spoke from the far end of the room. That's not what happened. Every head turned. It was Martin, one of the department's senior coordinators. He cleared his throat before continuing. The morning Danilla left, Greg told all of us that any questions about her accounts were to go directly to him because she'd prepared everything before leaving. The room fell silent. Greg looked sharply at Martin. I don't recall saying that. I do, Martin replied evenly. You specifically said she had everything organized. Another supervisor slowly nodded. I remember that meeting too. The division director leaned back, studying both Greg and the documents in front of him. If Danilla left detailed coverage, he asked, why was she later accused of abandoning her responsibilities? Greg's composure began to crack. People are remembering things differently, he said. We're wasting valuable time on someone who's no longer employed. The director ignored the remark and compared the email timestamps with the department's scheduling records. His expression hardened. Freeze all personnel actions involving this case, he instructed HR. No records are to be altered until we're finished. Just then, the conference room door opened. An IT administrator stepped inside holding a laptop. I think you all need to see this, she said. We found archived system logs that were never deleted. The IT administrator connected the laptop to the conference room display. These are archived server logs, she explained. They're generated automatically. Users can't simply make them disappear. Greg shifted in his chair. The division director folded his arms. Show us. A timeline appeared on the screen. There, the administrator said, pointing to a series of entries. Danilla's bereavement request was approved by Greg Lawson at 3:42 p.m. on the day she submitted it. The room went quiet. She clicked again. 4 days later, after Danilla left for her mother's funeral, someone accessed the personnel system and manually removed the approval from the active HR record. HR looked stunned. Can you identify who accessed it? One manager asked. The administrator nodded. The credentials belong to Greg Lawson. Greg leaned forward immediately. That doesn't prove I did it. Someone could have used my login. Before anyone responded, another investigator entered carrying a thick folder. We've reviewed the operational reports from that week. He placed several documents on the table. The project delays didn't occur because Danilla was absent. They occurred because the transition plan she prepared wasn't followed. He opened the first report. She assigned every pending task before leaving. Those assignments were never activated. Martin spoke up again. I remember asking Greg whether we should use Danilla's handoff notes. What did I say? Greg challenged. Martin met his eyes. You told us to ignore them because you had a better plan. The investigator turned another page. That decision resulted in missed deadlines and significant financial losses. The room was no longer questioning whether Danilla had been treated unfairly. Now everyone was asking how far the deception had gone. An HR representative slowly closed Danilla's personnel file. We processed the termination entirely on Greg's statements, she admitted. We never independently verified the leave approval. Later that afternoon, the division director called Danilla again. I know you've probably started looking for another position, he said. Please don't accept anything just yet. We're still uncovering information. Meanwhile, Greg made one final attempt to defend himself. I did what I believed was best for the company. The division director looked at him without blinking. He stood up and gathered the investigation file. An executive review has been scheduled for first thing tomorrow. Greg opened his mouth to respond. The director cut him off. Greg, this isn't about bereavement leave anymore. The executive review began with no speeches and no assumptions. The division director placed a stack of printed documents on the conference table. Before anyone says another word, he said, we're going to follow the timeline. One by one, every piece of evidence was verified. The original bereavement leave request. Greg Lawson's approval. The email confirming the approval had been sent to Danilla. The archived server logs showing the approval had later been removed from the active HR records. The security logs identifying the account used to make the change. Then came the project records. They showed that before leaving to attend her mother's funeral, Danilla had completed detailed handoff instructions, assigned responsibilities, and documented every pending task. The delays that followed were traced to Greg's decision to ignore those instructions and run the project his own way. When the project failed, he needed someone else to blame. Because Danilla was away grieving, he believed she was the perfect target. He had erased the approval, told HR she had abandoned her responsibilities without authorization, and presented the operational failure as proof that she couldn't be trusted. The room fell silent. Greg looked around the table, searching for support. No one spoke. Finally, the division director broke the silence. You approved her leave, you altered the record afterward, you misled human resources, and you terminated an employee who followed company policy during her mother's funeral. Greg tried one last time. I was protecting the department. No, the director replied, you were protecting yourself. HR immediately voided Danilla's termination. Her employment record was restored, the dismissal was removed from her file, and she was awarded back pay along with additional compensation for the wrongful termination. The company also began implementing new procedures, requiring independent verification of approved leave before any disciplinary action could be finalized. Later that afternoon, the division director invited Danilla to the office. This time, he met her in the lobby instead of making her wait. I'm sorry, he said sincerely. We failed you when you deserved compassion. Danilla accepted the apology with a quiet nod. I kept wondering if I had done something wrong, she admitted. You didn't, he answered. You did exactly what our policies required. As news of the investigation spread, co-workers who had silently accepted Greg's explanation reached out to Danilla. Several admitted they had doubted the company's version after seeing how carefully she had prepared before leaving, but they regretted not speaking up sooner. Greg's employment was terminated that same day for falsifying employment records, misleading HR during an investigation, and concealing information related to a major operational failure. His actions also exposed him to additional legal and financial consequences beyond losing his position. The company offered Danilla her job back immediately, along with a transfer to another department where she would report to different leadership. She thought about it carefully. Then she smiled politely. "I appreciate the offer," she said, "but I'd rather start somewhere new." Within weeks, she accepted a position at another company that valued both her experience and her integrity. She walked into her first day carrying the same folder that held the bereavement approval Greg had tried to erase. She kept it not because she wanted to remember the betrayal, but because it reminded her that truth can outlast manipulation when it's documented and defended. Losing her mother had already taught her what mattered most. Losing that job taught her something else. Professionalism isn't measured by sacrificing your family. It's measured by doing the right thing, even when someone with more power tries to rewrite the story. The day Greg believed he had erased Danilla's career became the day he ended his own.